I never went bass fishing. When I was your age, I went shark fishing a couple of times, which is fair. It's fair. You have a hook, it's a shark. It's fair. It's like hunting bear with bow and arrow. That's fair. Hunting bear with a gun is not fair. But with a bow and arrow, you miss and it kills you. It's fair. Anyway, I have noticed that we have some people missing. Kristen's missing. Aaron is missing. Who else is missing? He's bass fishing.
Did he win last time?
We caught a single fish, but I think it's the
That's how you moved. Can I ask you a question? Why are you wearing a hat that says dope on it?
I don't know.
That's not the kind of thing like it says to the world either a dedication to injectable drugs, which is not good, or a lack of intellectual self-confidence, which is worse. Your hat says awesome. So you can wear it. I'm just teasing you. Just take life so seriously.
What? What? I'm not going to be a thank
Where's Mr. Reynolds?
Good process.
No.
Where is he?
No, don't say that.
Why?
I'm going to joke about it.
Maybe ditch it.
Do it for yourself.
What is?
Oh, yeah. I did that too.
You can do that.
All right, let's talk. I was in my office. I was having lunch. I was playing computer games. I went to the coffee thing they had. I got a tree for Arbor Day. I had no idea it was Arbor Day. I went up to the assistant principal. I said, "What's with the stick?" And she says, "It's a tree." I said, "Do you always carry trees around?" She says, "On Arbor Day." And I said, "It's Arbor Day?" She said, "You didn't know?" I said, "I didn't even know it was in April. I have no idea." Yeah. Yeah, you want them? Yeah, go get them. They're in, I don't know, they were in the old cafeteria. No, they were in the ACT pit. They're probably in the principal's office now. They're oak trees, so you have to be able to plant them. It's not the kind of thing you put in a pot in your room. Unless you have a really big room. Or a tremendous pot. You need a tremendous pot. No, I'm going to put this in my yard. It's going to be a father-daughter thing. I'm going to let my daughter plant the tree, which means in a week it'll be dead. But what the hell? What the hell? I mean, my daughter is a wonderful young woman, and I think the world of her, but she is the kiss of death to living things. I gave her a cactus. She killed a cactus. How do you kill a cactus? Short of pouring gasoline on it. How do you kill a cactus? You walk into a room, there's this dead cactus. Awful. Worse than my wife. I got my wife a dozen roses for Valentine's Day. She killed them, the old wilt. She's like Twilight. She sucks the life out of them.
It happens eventually.
Huh? Yes, all things must die. That is true. That's a little.
Yeah, but your wife didn't kill them.
They're already dead. They're cut. They're like little beheaded flowers. All right, listen. We have to do a lot of things today, so let us focus. I want to. You're chatting. Are you doing your homework for another class back there? Tell me the truth. That sounds like a math conversation.
I'm not talking to you.
Someone's doing their math. Anyway, listen. The two classes were in different spots before the evening class. By the way, I appreciate you coming. Thank you very much. And the other class wants to have another one. They're like, they had two, we only had one. I was like, is that because you really like Chinese history, because you really like pizza? Yeah, it's pizza. Don't get me wrong, I'm charming, but it's pizza. Anyway, So what we did on Wednesday night was to start a new topic for everybody. So everybody started that together. So what we need to do is finish Indian material, and we need to talk about Gandhi's political career a bit. And then when we're done with that, we can jump and continue where we left off with Mao and China. Now, you guys are ready to write this paper right now. This is an ideological paper. You are bright people. You're fine. The stuff we're about to do will be useful, but it's not necessary. I want to point out a couple of things. First of all, you have 4 documents by Gandhi, 4 documents by Mao. Resources you have. Do not neglect. Some of you probably already lost it. I bet you did. I bet you did. Did you lose it? You have this still? I checked. Before I assign papers, I always check what stuff's available. So I checked out, like you check out the Gandhi entry on Wikipedia, which, by the way, changes every 6 months. I know that Wikipedia is supposed to, but they change it all the time. That's okay. It's not great. The treatment of Gandhi in here is quite good. I mean, for a 15-page, or the treatment of India, if you'd like, in the early 20th century is quite good. And the treatment of China, by the way, between 1860 or so and 1920 is quite good. So this is a very good resource for this paper, if only to understand these ideologies in political context. You are writing about ideas, but you can certainly relate that to the actual political careers of Mao and Gandhi, or for that matter, to the background events that they lived through. So this is useful. If you want to use other internet stuff, go ahead. If you want to find other sources, that's fine. Don't be surprised if I send you little things, because I'm always checking out the internet. So if I find, Gandhi's, discussion of, lower caste Indian rights, yeah, I might send you that. But what you have is plenty. Now, we are technically before the First World War. Some of the documents you have go all the way up to 1940 or 42. It is certainly true that the thought of these 2 individuals evolves over time. This is a relatively compact paper. So just treat their thought as, if you'd like, as a block. Yes, Gandhi in 1909 is a little different than Gandhi in 1940. The differences are not huge, and so for the purposes of this paper, don't bother with evolution over time unless that particularly interests you. You can treat Gandhi's thought as Gandhi's thought, Mao's thought as Mao's thought. That will be fine. Remember that this is not. Did I give you guys this talk? This is not 2 3-page papers stapled together. Right? So you need to find a unifying argument that your treatment of these 2 figures serves. In other words, you're going to be telling the reader why you're bothering to do this. And your introduction cannot be, Kiley made me do this, so here goes. Even if that's true, you can't do that. So you can argue, for example, that Gandhi has no Western influence, purely Indian. You can argue that Mao has only Western influence, purely Marxist-Leninism. Fine. Then you make an argument that Asian anti-imperialism has a very broad range of possible intellectual roots, ranging from European to completely Asian, at least based on these 2 figures. That's an argument. See my point? So decide what you find and make an argument based on what you find. You don't hammer the sources into an argument. You design an argument based on your understanding of the sources. I'm telling you this because when you do your research papers, you're going to be in a similar situation without hand-picked sources. And so read what you find and make a paper or an argument based on it. Do not try to force anything. That will make you unconvincing. Remember, you're writing about what you find out. You're writing about what trends you discover. Never form an argument and then look for stuff to back it up. Read your information, read your sources, and derive an argument from it. That's real research. The other approach is homework. You're not doing homework. You're writing papers. Right? You're beyond that. So that's good advice. So just because the question says, you guys like the word prompt, just because the prompt says, what's the European element in Asian anti-imperialist ideology? The answer can be none. I'm asking you a question. I'm not dictating an answer. All right. So, at the end of last class, did I have you guys research some stages in Gandhi's political career? Well, you know something? Why don't we do it together as we go along? I think that'll be more fun. All right, let's do that. All right. So we're talking about Gandhi. Let's talk about education in Britain. Let's talk about, let's see, South Africa. Let's talk about, let's see. Return to, actually, there's something. Let's see. Let's talk about now, we're not doing Gandhi's whole career. We're going to take this up to the early 30s, and then we're going to stop. By the way, you know, you guys can write this paper now. So this is stuff we're doing in the class. If it's useful to you, great. This is not tailored to the paper. We're going to do this. We're going to do some more Chinese material. On Tuesday, we change gears. We are starting something new. Anybody know what it is? What's the obvious thing that comes next? Yes, I'm starting the Second World War. And we're going to concentrate on the Second World War in Asia. But remember that our focus in this class is more ideological than political. So what are the ideologies we have to focus on? Excuse me? We did communism.
Okay.
Well, we did Marxism, Leninism in Russia. Come on, World War II. Actual good guys and bad guys. Fascism without a doubt. What else? Nazism. And by the way, those are a little creepy. And what's the third?
Japanese.
We're going to talk about Japanese nationalism, which is a little different from European nationalism. And so we have to look at those three, and then events-wise, we will have a look at the events of the Pacific War. Because everybody studies the Nazis, so we're going to go to the Pacific. We're going to concentrate on the conquest of European Asian empires by the Japanese, and then their developments after the war. And then after we do that, we have to come back and take a good look at the Cold War. And then we need to talk about Arab-Israeli issues, which we haven't even discussed yet. So we have to talk about Zionism, and we have to talk about Arab nationalism. And that will get us up through 1956, 67. And then we'll probably be done. So you can say, wow, the other classes got up to 2000. Yes, they did, but we will, by the end of the class, have dealt with most of the major political and cultural ideologies that affect contemporary policy, with a couple of exceptions. And so that's the emphasis. Yeah, this class is a little different from the others, and my two classes. And I like it that way. I do. So now, if you hate it, you're like, we didn't do the Battle of the Bulge. I wanted to do the Battle of the Bulge. There's something about tanks driving around that makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Then write that on your surveys and say, I really wanted more political stuff, because I read those. I do. So, for example, we did more feminism in this class because 2 years ago, because I used to just do Virginia Woolf, and 2 years ago I had someone say I would really like more history of feminism, so we put a class in about that. I read the surveys. Now, if you say, wow, you walk funny, you need to grow more hair, that I can't help you with. But don't hesitate to say there are things that are missing, because any history class you take is a series of choices. You can't do everything. But clearly those choices can be made. So when I made this class up, I made a series of choices. That's why I remember one time at the Art Institute, they let me teach a class on just the French Revolution. So I had 14 weeks on 15 years. That was cool. Because you could do everything. You can do everything. Fashion during the French Revolution. You do everything. You can't do, 18 weeks on 140 years all over the world. That's what was really more fun when I started here. They said, hey, world studies. That was it. World studies. During what period? All of it. from cavemen to whatever, Bill Gates. And how do I do that? They're like, find a way. And so I did something obviously very intellectual. Dr. Skinner spoke about, Clayburgh would talk about ships. The whole thing was about ships. These are Greek ships. These are Roman ships. These are Chinese ships. Aren't ships cool? I didn't like about the ships. No, ships are awesome. Minimal watched Titanic. Dr. Skinner loves ships. Anyway. So none of you did any background stuff last night?
No.
All right, so let's talk about it. Gandhi's educated in Britain. Now, has anybody done any work on Gandhi's biography? Ever read a paper on it in junior high school? Ninth grade? Yes? No? You did? What you write about?
How his education grade affected
Can't hear you.
how his education grade affected his ideas.
Good. Start me off. Help me out here.
Basically, all I remember is that the schooling that he went to, there's this one teacher that he actually continues to write about later in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that they talk about is that, I don't know, he had some horrible experiences as a young boy. And the experience basically told him that that's where his hatred of the British came out from, supposedly.
Does Gandhi hate the British?
No, but that's what my hatred was.
That it has its roots in England.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Gandhi in England certainly, remember, he's educated in England. The British always are interested in, how can I put this, making education available to people from their colonies with means. And Gandhi is someone with means. But don't kid yourself. Gandhi, as someone of Indian descent in Britain, clearly has to deal with certain exclusions, without a doubt. And I'm sure that bothered him. He's educated in law. He's going to law school there. There are two real important things about his British background that I would stress, although you're indicating that he picks up some resentments there. That's interesting. First is obviously he's got a law education, which means he's undoubtedly educated in Western political theory, Enlightenment notions of government. Because he's learning English Commonwealth, after all. He certainly is exposed to Marxism. He's certainly exposed to the different strains in European political thinking that you have read. And so Gandhi would be very comfortable with a lot of the stuff you have in class. The other thing that happens in England, and by the way, make sure I give you the books before the end of class. The other thing that happens in England, it's in England that he really has something of a Hindu awakening. Now, I want to point out, he's raised in India. His father's Hindu, his mother is Jain. But while he's in England, perhaps because of a certain element of cultural isolation, he falls in with, essentially, a group of intellectuals, some Indian intellectuals, who pay special attention to different works of Hindu scripture, Smriti specifically, particularly the Bhagavad Gita. And so Gandhi's attachment to that particular text dates from his time in Britain. That's why I'm going to give you a copy of it. So when you read his work on, Swaraj, 1909, and he's talking about the notion of duty, he's drawing directly, not just on Hindu ideas, but specifically on the Gita, more likely than not. Although perhaps on other texts as well, yeah.
Do you take attendance?
Yeah. But thank you for reminding me. No, listen, I told Remy on the way in, if you were walking in here and it's like 1:02 and I'm in my office and I'm like playing a computer game, which I do, I'm the Mongols right now, trying to make the world purple. And only about half the world is purple. What? Civilization 2. Because I know how to play it.
Yeah.
Every day come out, Civilization 6, look, it's even more work. I'm looking for a game, not a job. I have a job. So I learned Civilization 3, and it was so much work. I was like, this is too hard. It's supposed to be entertaining. I like computer games that are over in 4 minutes. You have a ship, you shoot, they shoot back, you sink, you're done. It's like, I feel better. How many of you play like really serious simulation games that take a week? Tell me the truth. How long did that take?
I stopped.
Really? I learned how to play Civilization when I was in graduate school, and I stopped when it became clear that I was never going to get my doctorate. I lost a good 6 months playing Civilization. I lost another good 6 months playing bridge. I lost a good 2 years, because I was in grad school for 8 years. But in 8 years, how long did I actually work on graduate school? Maybe 4. Now, I was working full-time at the Art Institute. That slowed me down. It slowed me down. But I spent a lot of time walking around Chicago having lunch with people. I'd like go to my friends who were working, like, hi, what are you doing? Let's have lunch. And so I stretched graduate school out, which was a good thing because I was in Chicago, and you're in graduate school in history. You're going to get a professorship at Minot State College in South Dakota. You're like, wow, I think I'll stay in Chicago, for a while. I didn't know I was going to end up here in the company of these how can I put this, young intellectual stars that just populate my world in a way that is most agreeable. And so, what are we talking about? Why am I talking about this?
Civilization 2.
Civilization 2. For a minute, I thought we were on a tangent.
No, you were talking about how he reminded you about the attendance, and then you were saying if you're in your office.
Yeah, so remind me. That's fine. Thank you very much. See what you did? We were rolling. We were learning things. Because the seniors do that, and they know what they're doing. You're like, ask Kiley a question about his life. Because at this point, the seniors don't want to know anything. You could set them on fire, and they wouldn't want to read the instructions on the fire extinguisher. Unless the first word on the fire extinguisher is prom, they're not going to read it.
Scholarship.
Yeah, because at this point, they're just like, I just seen you come into my office just now. You were there. And they asked, what are we doing today? And I'm like, why? And the answer is, because we want to know whether or not we're going to ditch. Now, as I said at the night class, if I were you, I would have a big chart next to my bed with all of my classes and like 3 X's under each one. And you save 1 X for the last week, so you take the whole last week off. I'm sure that student life would have kittens if you did that, but it's technically legal. Anyway, which brings me to Gandhi's legal education. See that? Wow, everything's connected. Gandhi spent an extra year in Britain because he was trying to conquer the whole world as a Mongol. So Gandhi finishes his legal education. Goes to India, actually. He actually becomes an attorney in India. This is a true story. It really is. I remember reading this in a biography. He's not very effective because he is so soft-spoken that he's not an effective advocate in court. He really is. You wouldn't expect it, but Gandhi's a very soft-spoken individual. And ultimately, he gets a job in South Africa. He's actually brought there to look after the legal interests of Indians in South Africa, particularly Muslim Indians in South Africa. And so it's in South Africa that certain developments take place. First of all, it's in South Africa that Gandhi really begins his life, developing an anti-imperialist character. And combined with this is his resentment of the racist aspects of imperialism. And we spoke about this when we spoke about Kipling and Bagehot and the rest. Again, Gandhi certainly experienced a certain amount of, to see the very least, racial exclusion or condescension when he's in Britain. And in South Africa, that becomes especially clear when you consider the role of race in South Africa. Now remember, he's there, this is the late 19th century. He's in South Africa from around, 1892 or 1893 to 1915. So he's there for 2 decades. And England controls the southern part of South Africa. By the way, you need to know that South Africa, as the region, is the size of the U.S. Eastern Seaboard. It's big. If you really want a good exercise, don't do it on maps, because maps are distorted. Take a globe, and put your fingers on either side of the nation of France, and then transplant them on the United States. It gives you a sense of how big things are. Because, distances in the United States are probably second nature. South Africa is a big country. The southern part of what is now the Republic of South Africa is governed by England. It's part of the British Empire. The northern parts of what is now South Africa, the northeastern parts, are independent republics ruled by, or I should say, governed by the Dutch. I should say, the descendants of the Dutch. They call themselves the Boers. South Africa, did we talk about this at all? I don't want to repeat.
I just talked about it in English class.
Okay, South Africa has a really interesting mix of peoples in the late 19th century. There are Europeans there. Some are of English descent, some are of Dutch descent. Who else is down there? Which ones? See, that's the important issue. There are two different, if you like, groups, or two different sets of African ethnicities present in South Africa. On the one hand, there are a group of people who have actually been in South Africa for a long time. Okay, they have a very definite set of physical characteristics. They have lighter brown skin. They have very large fat distribution, in their rump. They speak very distinctive languages with sets of clicks as consonants. Have you ever heard any of these? They actually have an influence on people from Central Africa who migrate further south. So what nation, what African nation, I don't mean a modern African nation, I mean what nationality is Nelson Mandela? Anybody know? Can you spell it?
It's like, there's a click in it.
Yeah, spell it like this.
It's like, so,
How do you say it?
so,
Now there's too big a gap. You have to put it all together. It's Osa. Can you do it? Osa.
well,
Now you're going Osa. That's like saying Albert. You put it together. There's 4 different clicks, and you can imagine what they are. Just click around with your mouth. It's actually it actually becomes second nature. I actually learned. I shouldn't tell you this. I learned in a state of semi-inebriation in the African History Department at Northwestern. Northwestern has a big African History Department. They always have drinks on Friday afternoons. I was out with them, and they actually taught me how to do this. It helps if you're a little lubricated with, various adult beverages that you should not try until you are of an appropriate age. In any case, that consonant structure actually is an influence on northern African ethnicities from these southern African peoples who are there when the Dutch arrived. Right? So you have the original inhabitants of South Africa. Then you have people from from South Central Africa who migrate south. The Zulu, the Sotho, the Xhosa, and others. Then you have Europeans. And what other big component do you have, ethnically? Well, who's Gandhi?
Indian.
Yeah, you have a large component of Indians that the British have imported for purposes of labor, skilled and unskilled, by the way. So, what happens in South Africa in the late 19th century is a fairly strict set of, if you like, institutions based on separating these different ethnicities. And so different ethnicities have different privileges. Excuse me? It's the ancestor of apartheid. Apartheid doesn't really exist in its current form until South Africa is unified, and then the Dutch, who are conquered, actually play a big role in its administration. But you're quite right. This is the forerunner of apartheid. And so, Gandhi, as an Asian, is considered, if you'd like, brown, as opposed to white or black. And so Gandhi has more privileges than black Africans, but fewer than Europeans. And so there are some famous stories about Gandhi. He's thrown out of a first-class train carriage at one point, and that really bothers him. He writes about that at some length. And so Gandhi becomes very aware of, if you'd like, the racist character of imperialism, because it does have a white supremacist, or I should say a European supremacist, characteristic. What's interesting, and by the way, you'll see this if you do reading on Gandhi, because I check all this stuff out. I checked out Facebook and stuff. A lot is made of the fact that Gandhi's initial protest is that as an Indian, he does not have the privileges of Europeans. He does not complain about the fact that others in South Africa have fewer privileges than he. And so Gandhi's views on race evolve. His initial impression is, I should have the privileges of any educated person. I am an educated person. So he resents the fact that he's being treated as a second-class citizen. It doesn't bother him that black Africans are being treated as third-class citizens. And people make a big deal of that Gandhi is not really rejecting the racist structure of South Africa. Over time, it becomes clear that his views on race develop. And depending on the biography you read, they will make a lot of this or not. So if you look at the Wikipedia treatment, I'm sure, I looked at it about a week ago, they spend about a paragraph on it. You can decide whether or not you think this is an important character of his work. As his ideas develop, Gandhi becomes very concerned with, if you like, the rights of people who are exploited in general. So clearly his views on race and his views on gender, by the way, evolve, as do his views on class, because Gandhi will also, in his maturity, seek to reform the Indian notion of caste, particularly the lower caste. What? You're looking at me like you're going to ask another question about that.
I'm not gonna say.
Okay. So South Africa then is really important in Gandhi's development. It's also in South Africa that he writes that article you read. Now, we didn't talk about this. We were mostly speaking about Gandhi's attitudes towards Indian civilization versus Western civilization. But in the article you read, Gandhi does talk about revolution. What does Gandhi say about potentially fighting for Indian autonomy? Does anybody remember any passages about that? Does he believe that military revolution is an option for India? Why?
He says something like it would take it would be very hard to arm all Indians at the same level of leadership.
So that's a practical argument. Notice that Gandhi makes practical arguments against violent revolution. There's clearly an ideological argument as well. He would say that such revolution is typical of European civilization, which is exactly what he's rejecting, or I should say European civilization. It's exactly what he doesn't want to embrace. And so he would argue that the Hindu definition of civilization would not allow for such an experience. Now, the Gita says that you should fight if it's part of your duty. Clearly, Gandhi believes that it is not part of his duty, that there are other ways to achieve this. So there is an ideological reason, but you make an excellent point. Never think of Gandhi as some detached figure whose influence is largely spiritual. This fellow is educated in law. He is extremely politically astute, and everything he does is calculated for effect. What does that mean? What does it mean to calculate something for effect?
Everything has a purpose.
Not what kind of purpose. Exactly. What effect will this given action have, not just on the political setting, but on public opinion? Gandhi is educated in England in the late 19th century. He is aware of England middle-class values. He's aware of the English media. He really is. He doesn't have cameras. He has reporters. Gandhi's strategies, Gandhi's tactics, Gandhi's choices are calculated to achieve maximum political effect in India and in Britain. And he's very aware of that. And he's aware of that from a very early stage, because in South Africa, he engages in his first, if you'd like, incidents of activism and nonviolent protest. So why does Gandhi reject the notion of violent revolution? Number one, it goes against his ideologies, as you saw in Swaraj. He would consider it not typical of Indian civilization. Number two, what was your answer? There's no way to arm them all. Number three, what would be the effect on Britain of a violent revolution? What would be the effect on British public opinion? You see Indians as enemies, correct? On the other hand, what is British public opinion of a non-violent process of protest? Exactly. Gandhi's very aware of that. So this is a guy whose ideology, whose tactics, and whose practical decisions all converge. One other thing. At the turn of the century, 1899, actually it's 1900s, 1902, the British fight the Boers. They actually fight for control of those northeastern states in South Africa, because gold is discovered up there. So the British go and take it from the Boers. It's a very nasty war. It's actually something of a guerrilla war. The Boers are very effective, rapid, light cavalry, and they inflict some serious casualties. And Gandhi is already seeking to, how can I put this, kind of burnish the role of India in the eyes of the British Empire. And so Gandhi organizes a military unit that serves the British during the Boer War. Now, from what you know about Gandhi, what aspect of the military would he join? What? No, he can't be a general. He doesn't have any military training. Yeah, Gandhi, he organizes a corps of stretcher bearers. And by the way, Gandhi's decorated for heroism. Gandhi and the unit that he organizes, because he actually takes great risks, carrying British wounded out of the battle. So, by the way, one other thing. If you work for the British Army, what do you learn about? Well, their tactics and their capabilities. Can India stand up to the British Army in the early 20th century? They can't. Not without a huge influx of military infrastructure. And so you can argue that Gandhi's tactics, Gandhi's nonviolent practices are not just philosophical, they're not just material, they are also a very shrewd, kind of evaluation of Indian capability. So all these things come together. So South Africa is a huge learning experience for Gandhi. And by the way, he doesn't know what he's going to do. When we look at this in retrospect, we can see his political character kind of crystallizing. All right, with that in mind. Yes?
How did South Africa get politically divided again? Is it before it started that?
What do you mean politically divided?
Culturally divided, like the three classes.
Oh, you mean how does the racial, how do the racial divisions take place?
Yeah.
It's a complicated question. You can argue that the existence of slavery in Dutch South Africa, because the Dutch do have, institution of slavery. The existence of slavery, coupled with the presence of this other African ethnicity, create a situation where the Dutch initially treat different Africans differently. When the British conquer the region, there is already a substantial Dutch population, and so Dutch attitudes towards race get enshrined into the British administration. Remember that the Dutch also have their own kingdoms to the north, I should say their own states to the north. When the British conquer all of it, the Dutch actually become very important in the administration of that colony. And so they actually put in place what you would call modern apartheid. Consider something. Anybody know this? What's the official language of South Africa up until the 1990s? In the 1990s, remember that Mandela gets out of prison, they have popular elections, he becomes president. But up until the liberalization of South Africa, what's the official religion? What's the official language of South Africa? It's Afrikaans, which is a Dutch derivative. That shows you the Dutch cultural power in South Africa. There are more of them than there are the British. So it's part of the British Empire, but there's a huge Dutch cultural force. And I would argue that those racial divisions very much grow from Dutch colonial practice. That's the best I can do. But you can probably find out a lot about that. You guys are born when? 95, 96? So you guys were born with Nelson Mandela as the president of South Africa. When I was your age, the old-fashioned apartheid regime was still in place. Mandela was still in jail when I was a teenager. And when I was in college, one of the big things you went out and protested about was divestment. You know what that means?
No.
Divestment means if your university was invested in companies that did business with South Africa, you put pressure on the university to sell those stocks. The idea was if the Western world divests in South African investments, it would put great pressure on the South African regime. And South Africa was a pariah state. When I was a kid, they weren't allowed at the Olympics. The global community was like, you can't do this. And it wasn't until the late 80s that started to that those institutions started to melt away. And then Mandela's let out of prison. He has that famous meeting with the South African president de Klerk. They liberalize the country. They have a presidential election, and suddenly Mandela's president. They had a movie about him that was okay. It wasn't great. In fact, you know what was a better movie about Mandela? Did you all see that movie about the South African rugby team?
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
That was a much better movie about Mandela than the movie about Mandela. He just died. You know this, right? He just died. I have to send you guys a list of paper topics. Mandela is an excellent paper topic. It really is. Because always remember something. Mandela, as an anti-imperialist, Mandela has semi-socialist character. Remember, Mandela's in jail for terrorism. He's not in jail for protesting. Nelson Mandela was blowing stuff up. And by the way, he had every reason to do it. It's seen from a certain standpoint. So Mandela was a fascinating, mixture of political events and ideology, as is Gandhi. All right, so Gandhi goes back to India in 1915. What's going on in 1915? There you go. When Gandhi returns to India, the war is already going on. And so we can talk about three things. First of all, we can talk about consider, in South Africa, he's developed an anti-imperialist streak. You read a text. Now, if you look at a lot of biographies, they'll say that this idea develops later. That's not the case. Look at the date on the document that you read. It's 1909. All right? So he's already got these ideas. He's already got ideas for Indian autonomy, for Indian separation. You can argue that in South Africa, they're just concepts. He puts them in practice once he goes home. The question is, do Gandhi and his associates envision an independent India? And the answer is not at first. What they're really interested in is Indian autonomy under the aegis of the British Empire, under the umbrella of the British Empire. Because there are advantages to being in the British Empire. For one thing, they will defend you, which is useful. Remember, Canada had semi-independent status until, find out, the 1960s? Canada is not... when I was a kid, in 1971, I went to Canada, and Queen Elizabeth was still on the money. The King and Queen of England on the money. Now, that's not that long ago. Well, maybe it is. But the fact is that, by the way, it's no accident that this is happening during the First World War, because clearly the imperialist powers are under pressure during the First World War. What other part of the British Empire that's been governed by the British for a long time starts to rebel against British rule during the First World War? Anybody know? The Irish rebel in 1916. The Irish rebelled during the war because they know the British army is busy elsewhere, and the British are furious at them. The British are like, you're not being very loyal. And the Irish response is, why should we be loyal to you bastards? Or to say it properly, why should we be loyal to you bastards? You got to remember, my grandmother's from Ireland. She came over in 1921. The Irish War of Independence is 1916 to 1921 when they finally win it. She came over to take care of her brothers. Her brothers all had to leave very suddenly because my three great uncles were all blowing stuff up in Ireland. They had to come to America. She came to take care of them. She met my grandfather, and the rest is history. But I was raised by a woman with a thick Irish brogue and a real hatred for England. I remember in 1977 or 78, the IRA blew up Lord Louis Mountbatten, cousin of Queen Elizabeth, an important English nobleman and a general in the Second World War. And they blew him up on his yacht. And the news came over the radio. I was at my grandmother's. She was ironing at the time, and she looked up and listened. And she said, I was your age, 16, 17? She said, and I quote, "Gotcha, you bastard." And you're like, Grandma's rooting for the terrorists. Because the IRA were a bunch of bastards, but not in my grandmother's eye. And she never became a U.S. citizen. Every January, I had to drive Grandma down and get her registered as an alien. She never became a citizen. She thought it was too much trouble. She was Irish till her death. Little Irish family. Anyway, what are we talking about? Not civilization, not attendance. My grandmother. So, when Gandhi returns to India, you can argue that his theoretical or his, I should say, kind of South African experiences get expressed in the drive for Indian autonomy. But he starts small. So, help me out. Has anybody ever done any reading on the Indian National Congress? No? Google it. Find out when it's founded. Come on. A lot of people think Gandhi founds the Indian National Congress. Total nonsense. When's the Indian National Congress founded? want to say 1881, 85. The Indian National Congress is founded. Who puts it together? Anybody know? Excuse me?
Nehru?
No, Nehru's too young for that. Nehru's a baby. It's actually put in place with as kind of a joint exercise of Indian advocates and the British. Now, why would the British assist in the founding of an Indian nationalist group? Do the British want to rule India as, if you'd like, a completely subject domain? Can the British run India by themselves? Can you possibly administer 150 million people, that's about what it is at this point, by yourself if you're a country of 30 million? And most of them want to stay home. No, the British require Indian assistance. The entire British civil service in India is Indian. The people who run it are British. But hell, there are Indian judges on the courts. The British have always, or the British in the late 19th century, are ruling India as, if you'd like, a semi-self-running colony. And obviously it's important to the British to have Indian cooperation. And so you could argue that the Indian National Congress is permitted, even encouraged by the British. I mean, the Indians found it, but the British do not oppose it because the British see it as an important source of potential cooperation and a source of useful kind of Indian, what's the word I'm looking for, self-definition. Now, that doesn't mean the British are happy with everything the INC does. They're not. And they actually arrest a significant number of INC leaders over the years, depending on what they do. Gandhi gets arrested a couple times. So Gandhi comes back in 1915. He gets involved with Indian autonomy. He already has some pre-existing ideas on that score. He gets involved with the Indian National Congress, although at first he's relatively minor. The other thing that Gandhi does, think about this. If you wanted autonomy from the British Empire, you wanted the British Empire to grant you more self-rule, what would you do to get in the good graces of the British authorities? In 1915. What? Can't hear you. Can Gandhi fight in the war? How old is he at this point? Well, he spent 20 years in South Africa, and he was a law student before that. He's in his late 40s. He's my age. People my age don't join wars. They read about them in newspapers. Actually, they hope they don't happen. So the war's going on. How do you serve the British? Well, the Indians don't have any. What does India have? Lots of. Yeah, Gandhi recruits Indian soldiers for the British military. Why would he do that? Think about this. This is a guy who doesn't believe in violence. He doesn't believe in warfare. But if you consider, and this is why I would say Gandhi is a very shrewd politician. He is looking to increase the stature of the Indian nationalist movement in the eyes of the British authorities. It's a fascinating contradiction. But is it a contradiction? Or is it, again, something that is very carefully calculated for effect? Quite so. Well, you know something? That's a factor as well. I don't know to what extent Gandhi considered the development of a trained Indian corps of soldiers as useful. Remember that the British have had Indian troops in India for half a century. The British have always depended on Indian troops. The British are policing India with Indian troops, which is why in 1857 they have such a problem when the Indian troops rebel. That's 60 years earlier, the Indian rebellion. And so remember that there's the British Army in India. Those are European troops in India. And then there's the Indian Army, which are Indian troops with British officers. And they are actually founded by the Dutch East India Company. That's why we spoke about that last class. The Dutch East India Company has been employing Indian mercenaries for 2 centuries. And they operate under white officers. So if you're a British Army officer and you retire, you get a posting in the Indian Army. You command Indian troops. And they actually pay you a lot better because the Dutch East India Company has more money than the British government. So India, the British Raj in India is an incredibly complex regime. It's not just, I'm the British royal governor, do what I say. It's a very elaborate interplay of British and Indian civil servants and authorities. And it really requires a great deal of study. And if you're interested in it, read a book, or, take History of India with, knows a lot about this, Dr. Montgomery knows a lot about it. It's very intricate. And Gandhi's part of this. All right, so Gandhi then gets interested in in the Indian National Congress, which brings us to this. So this is the early 20s. In the early 20s, it's almost as if he's trying out his tactics. In the early 20s, Gandhi gets involved in Indian land reform. Specifically, he advocates for Indian peasants against their landlords. Now, who are their landlords? Who would be the landlords of Indian peasants? In states like Gujarat and some of the others. You have a combination of Indian nobility and British. And remember now, if you're a British landlord and you have Indian tenants, you want them raising crops for export, correct? And those crops might not be in the best interest of your tenants, but they're in your best interest. Then there's also issue of rents. There's issue of if there's a famine, is the landlord responsible for supporting his tenants, things like that. And so Gandhi gets involved in a number of land movements. These are not court cases. These are popular protest examples. Gandhi is actually using his nonviolent protest ideas in real cases. And so has anybody ever heard of this term? Satyagraha that's kind of the term that Gandhi would use. He actually writes an article on it. That the term that Gandhi would use for, if you'd like, political protest in the spirit of Hindu civilization, in the spirit of Swaraj. Some people would use the term ahimsa, which is nonviolence. And so Gandhi, and by the way, when you resist, if your landlord or if the British authorities pass a law and you deliberately do not follow it. So, for example, there's in South Africa he did this. In South Africa, there was a registration law where all Indian emigres had to register with the government so the government could track their movements. And Gandhi organized, back in South Africa, a refusal to follow the law. And the same thing happens in the land reform cases. He organizes the peasants, tells them to not follow the law. And by the way, you don't just not follow the law, you accept the consequences. And you make sure that the government and the press sees you doing it. That's the point. The point is to, A, demonstrate that the cooperation of Indians is important to the British, management of India itself. And certainly if the British want to make a profit from India, it's very important you do this. It's during this period that Gandhi starts to spin his own cloth and urges the Indians to boycott British cloth, thus making the colony significantly less profitable. Because if you need Indians to run India, then if Indians don't cooperate, India doesn't work. And Gandhi recognizes that. He recognizes that is much more effective than shooting a gun. Because if someone writes an article about an Indian rebellion, that will not play well with the British people who are represented in Parliament. But this does. So it's a fascinating example of kind of recognizing the economic and political machinery of India as depending on Indians and playing up, public relations-wise, the tactics that he chooses. It's very politically effective. And by the way, he wins. He wins these different land reform cases. And in the process, vastly increases his stature. So Gandhi, by 1920 or 1921, Gandhi in the early 20s becomes a leader of the Indian National Congress. By the way, what modern institution grows from the Indian National Congress? Do you all know? What are the two big political parties? Well, India has a bunch of political parties. What are the two biggest political parties in India? The BJP, which is a Hindu nationalist party, and the Congress Party. The Congress Party is the lineal descendant of the Indian National Congress. That's why it's called the Congress Party. And so Gandhi is prominent in the Indian National Congress. Nehru is prominent in the Indian National Congress. Gandhi gets, you all know this, right? Gandhi gets assassinated in 1948 by Hindu nationalists. Nehru becomes the first president of India. Gandhi would never have been president. He wouldn't have been interested in the job. And then the Congress Party governs India for, oh Lord, they first lose power when I am a freshman in high school. I want to say in 1977 is the first time they lose power. So they hold power for 30 years. First Nehru, then his daughter. You all know Nehru's daughter? His daughter's name is Indira Gandhi. No relation to Gandhi. Gandhi's a fairly common name. And so then she is voted out of power in 76, and a fellow from another party, I don't know which party, takes office, and his name was Morahi Desai. And he breaks the power of the Congress Party after 30 years. Excuse me, what? No. So Indian politics is very much, affected by the institutions of the late 19th century. All right. Everybody, Google this. Some people call it the Amritsar incident. It's not an incident, it's a mess. What happens? Anybody know offhand? You don't. Next class, I'll show you a movie. Find me a date. I want to say 1919.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Remember, Gandhi is not the only person agitating for Indian autonomy. Gandhi's not the only person rejecting British rule in India. There are a number of different individuals. And by the way, the notion of peaceful protest is also not particular to Gandhi. After the First World War, everybody recognizes that the imperialist powers are somewhat vulnerable because they've suffered a lot of damage, they've spent a lot of money. Now, it's not World War I that undoes imperialism, it's World War II that undoes imperialism. But World War I clearly plays a role in, if you like, sparking anti-imperialist sentiment. It's clearly present before World War I. Gandhi's writing about it in 1909. But World War I really is an accelerant. And so in 1919, there's an Indian protest movement, and a British major opens fire. He's got British troops with him, and they open fire on the meeting. Now, they don't use automatic weapons. You'll see some propaganda posters where you have the British firing on an Indian crowd with machine guns. They don't do that. But they do have rapid firing, breech loading British rifles. And, oh Lord, 900 people are killed or wounded? It's bloody. Next class, I will bring a film. They have a film version of it. They made a movie called Gandhi with Ben Kingsley in the title role. Kingsley's half Indian. And the depiction of Amritsar is actually, in the film, quite accurate. There's no elaboration. And the British major is ultimately hauled before an Indian court and questioned by Indian justices. Because remember, the court system in India has Indian justices in it, as well as European ones. You should say English. What's going to be the effect of this? It represents a great opportunity and a great danger for a Gandhi who is active in land reform and whose reputation is increasing in the Indian National Congress. What's the opportunity? What's the danger? Sure.
Well, the opportunity is some British just open fire and randomly just killed 900 people.
So what's going to happen?
There's going to be riots.
Killed and wounded. Yeah.
There's going to be riots. People are going to become unrest. There's going to be a lot of unrest. People are going to be angry. And
you get a lot of resentment of the British, and you can use that. What's the danger? Does Gandhi want riots? The danger is that this could lead to violent reaction, which is something that Gandhi doesn't want to happen.
Riots can be easily put down. They look really bad.
Expand the press. Plus, people die. Gandhi is not. He really does value human life. He doesn't want anybody to get killed. He really would prefer to do this administratively. And so this has a significant effect on Gandhi's rise. So his land reform activities and the events in Amritsar really catapult him to real prominence in the Indian National Congress. And between 1922 and 24, he leads a variety of other protests, demonstrations, etc. And in fact, in 1922, he doesn't do it between 22 and 24 because in 1922 he's accused of sedition and sentenced to 6 years in prison. So they lock him up in 1922. Sedition is organized resistance to a government in a way that seeks to undermine the government. So if Barack Obama is president and you're a Republican and you say, I don't like Barack Obama, or vote against him, and by the way, he wears ugly ties, that's not sedition. That's...
I want to say that in early America, it might have been
the Alien and Sedition Act?
Yeah.
It depends how John Adams chooses to define the word. The word sedition would be the opposite of being loyal opposition. So if you are the head of the Republicans in the Senate, you don't want to undermine the government, you just want to replace it. But Gandhi is accused of trying to undermine the British government in India. And they sentenced him to 6 years. But you know something? Gandhi's persona, because remember now, at this point, he has adopted the persona that you're familiar with. This is the Gandhi who will only wear homespun cloth. This is the Gandhi who only appears in traditional Indian garb. If you see pictures of Gandhi in a suit, you're looking at pictures of Gandhi before 1918. You know, at this point, Gandhi makes a point of having as simple a life as possible. He's encouraging people to make their own cloth, to boycott, imports. He always wears traditional garb. He dresses, or I should say, he eats a very simple diet. So this is now the Gandhi that's familiar to you. Can you really lock him up in prison for that long? They keep him for 2 years out of 6. He gets sick. I forget why. He has to leave prison for health reasons. He has himself treated, and then they never send him back. They're like, okay, be good. You don't have to go back to jail. And so Gandhi for, 5-6 years kind of retreats from politics, or I should say retreats from nationalism, and gets involved with other issues. Anybody know what Gandhi gets involved in 1925, 26, 27, 28? 2 things in particular. It's during this period that he really gets concerned with the status of lower castes in India, and he seeks to raise their status. And it's during this period that Gandhi gets particularly concerned with women's issues in India, particularly the practice of child marriage. And Gandhi got married very young, and his wife was even younger. And so, now, here's an interesting question. You read Gandhi's views on Indian civilization and Western civilization. Are Gandhi's views on women and are Gandhi's views on caste, are they a product of his Indian roots, or is he consciously or unconsciously challenging European notions of equality? That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question to ask. Because these are old Indian institutions. I mean, centuries old. Millennia, even. In 1930, Gandhi comes out of this period of kind of political limbo and gets involved with nationalist issues again during the Salt March. And this is a good place to stop. You'll know, this is where we'll stop. Gandhi, the British have a salt tax, and Gandhi leads a march, I think 240, 250 miles to the sea, where he makes his own salt. And he doesn't walk by himself. He's got people following him. By the way, half the people on the Salt March are women, which is fascinating. And Gandhi, with the Salt March, is re-injected into the forefront of Indian nationalist politics. And that's a good place to stop with Gandhi. All right. So we're doing good. We are pretty much done with this until after the Second World War. Next class, we are going to do a little bit of Chinese material, and then we're going to start the World War II material. So good luck on your papers. Start them this weekend. Very good advice.